On Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo III placed a golden crown on the head of King Charles the Great, also known as Charlemagne, during Mass at Old St. Peter's Basilica. This dramatic act did more than honor a conquering warrior. It fused the authority of the Roman Church with the military and administrative prowess of the Carolingian dynasty, laying the groundwork for what would become the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne's coronation revived the idea of a unified Roman polity in the West, centuries after the fall of Rome, establishing a precedent of mutual reinforcement between Pope and Emperor that shaped medieval politics until 1806. Charlemagne had inherited the Frankish kingdom in 768 upon the death of his father, Pepin the Short, who himself had wrested the crown from the Merovingian do-nothing kings. Through decades of ceaseless campaigning, against the Lombards in Italy, the Saxons in the north, and the Avars in the east, Charlemagne extended his dominion from the Pyrenees to the Elbe River. By 802, he had subdued pagan Saxony, forcibly baptized thousands, and secured his empire's northern frontier. To the south, he incorporated Benevento and Dalmatia, pressing influence into Byzantine Italy. His authority rested on a highly mobile army of heavy cavalry, supported by local levies and Christian missionary networks that blended conquest with conversion. Yet Charlemagne's true genius lay in governance. Recognizing the challenge of ruling a realm of diverse peoples, dialects, and elites, he instituted the Missi Dominici, that is, royal envoys sent in pairs, one lay, one clerical, to enforce capitularies, that is, royal edicts, oversee counts, and audit local administration. These inspectors traveled circuits called missadici, ensuring that justice, coinage, and church reform reached even the remotest district. He standardized weights, measures, and coinage, minting silver deniers that were stamped with his image and title. His court at Aachen became a melting pot of Carolingian artistry, bringing together scholars from across Europe such as Alcuin of York, Paul the Deacon, and Einhard, who led the Carolingian Renaissance, reviving classical learning, script, and liturgical uniformity. Charlemagne's religious policy reinforced his political unity. He convened synods to root out clerical corruption, mandated the establishment of cathedral schools, and promoted a uniform liturgy based on Roman usage. The palace chapel at Aachen, with its glittering mosaic and spolia from Ravenna, symbolized this fusion of Roman tradition and Frankish might. By championing the church, Charlemagne bolstered his legitimacy. He styled himself protector of the papacy and intervened in papal disputes, asserting that the emperor served as God's secular arm on earth. Upon Charlemagne's death in 814, his 88-year-old legacy passed to his son, Louis the Pious. Although Louis initially maintained unity, his reign saw the strain between dynastic ambition and administrative cohesion. Louis's pious reforms and favoritism toward his own sons sparked revolts among counts and churchmen. In 817, Louis issued the Ordinatio Imperii, attempting to prescribe an orderly succession by making his eldest son, Lothair, co-emperor, while granting subsidiary realms to his younger brothers, Pepin and Louis the German. Yet internecine conflict erupted, culminating in civil wars that weakened central authority. By 840, the fracturing culminated in the Treaty of Verdun in 843, which partitioned the Carolingian inheritance among Louis's three surviving sons: Charles the Bald in the west, Louis the German in the east, and Lothair, with the imperial title and a central stretch from the North Sea to Italy. Although the imperial dignity continued nominally at Rome under Lothair and his successors, the unity Charlemagne had forged dissolved into rival kingdoms of West Francia, East Francia, and Lotharingia. In the decades that followed, the Carolingian grasp on power ebbed under external pressures, such as the Viking raids along the Atlantic and Seine, Magyar incursions in the Danube basin, and Saracen raids on Mediterranean coasts. Local magnates, that is, counts, dukes, and bishops, fortified their domains, often ignoring imperial summons. By 924, the deposition of the last Carolingian ruler in Germany, Charles III the Simple, signaled the dynasty's end. Yet the ideal of a Christian emperor seated in Rome, crowned by the Pope, endured. That ideal, born in AD 800, would be revived in 962 under Otto I and persist, albeit often tenuously, until the fall of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. After the fragmentation of the Carolingian realm, a period of turmoil ensued in East Francia, that is Germany, marked by rival dukes jockeying for power and repeated Magyar raids. In 919, the German princes elected Henry I the Fowler of of Saxony as king, inaugurating the Ottonian dynasty. Although Henry refrained from imperial pretensions, he laid the foundations for renewed royal authority by forging alliances with the Slavic duchies east of the Elbe, reorganizing frontier defenses into fortified burghs, and co-opting the church as a source of administrative talent. His victories over the Magyars at Merseburg in 933 ended decades of devastating raids, demonstrating that a revitalized king could secure the realm. Henry's son, Otto I, who reigned from 936 to 973, took up his father's mantle but extended it further. Upon his election in 936, Otto faced rebellions by his own relatives and by the powerful dukes of Saxony, Bavaria, Swabia, Franconia, and Lorraine. With resolute determination, Otto defeated each challenge in succession, asserting that kingship is derived from divine sanction rather than mere birthright. Crucially, he built a cadre of loyal bishops and abbots, that is, Cluniac reformers and Benedictine monks, granting them extensive lands and privileges in exchange for spiritual and administrative service. This imperial church system provided a network of trusted officials who owed allegiance only to the king, undermining hereditary dukes and ensuring efficient governance. In 955, Otto's triumph at the Battle of Lechfeld over the Magyars cemented his status as the savior of Christendom. That victory enabled him to project power south into Italy, where the papacy faced both internal strife and external threats from Berengar II of Italy. Otto intervened in 962, marching on Rome to rescue Pope John XII. In a ceremony at St. Peter's Basilica, the Pope crowned Otto Augustus, thus reviving the imperial title first bestowed on Charlemagne. This act forged the Holy in Holy Roman Empire. The ruler became both secular overlord of Germany and protector of the papacy, entrusted with safeguarding Christendom's spiritual center. Otto's reign also inaugurated the Ottonian Renaissance. At his court in Aachen and later in Magdeburg and Regensburg, he patronized artists and scholars such as Liutprand of Cremona, Wittekind of Corvey, and Abbot Gerbert of Aurillac, the future Pope Sylvester II. Monasteries became centers of manuscript production, metalwork, and liturgical innovation. Architecture flourished with Ottonian churches. The Abbey Church of St. Michael at Hildesheim, begun under Bishop Bernward, displayed a harmonious blend of classical forms and Germanic tradition. Otto's successors maintained his template. Otto II focused on southern Italian campaigns and cultural patronage, but suffered a crushing defeat at Stylo in 982 against the Calbid Emirate of Sicily. Otto III, enthroned as a child in 983, envisioned a renewed Roman Empire with its capital at Rome. Educated by scholars like Gerbert, he attempted to revive classical administration and Christian universalism. His palace complex at Aachen even included a replica of St. Peter's tomb. Yet, Otto III's premature death in 1002 dashed these grand ambitions. Henry II, Otto III's cousin, shifted focus back to Germany. Coronated emperor by Pope Benedict VIII in 1014, he consolidated ducal authority, mediated noble feuds, and championed monastic reform through the Columbanian and Cluniac movements. He endowed the bishoprics of Bamberg and Zeitz with imperial lands, creating centers of learning and piety loyal to the crown. His canonization in 1146 as the only German saint emperor underscored the fusion of sanctity and sovereignty that the Ottonians championed. By the time of Henry II's death in 1024, the Ottonian model, characterized by imperial election by princes, reliance on a church-based bureaucracy, military leadership against external foes, and partnership with the papacy, had become institutionalized. The Holy Roman Empire under the Ottonians had transformed from a loose confederation into a transnational polity claiming to be the successor of Rome. Although dynastic decline would soon lead to the Salian dynasty under Conrad II, the Ottonian revival had imprinted the essential character of medieval emperorship, a fusion of German kingship, papal endorsement, and the mantle of Christian universal authority. With the death of Henry II and the extinction of the Ottonian line, the German princes elected Conrad II of the Salian family in 1024. Conrad and his descendants, Henry III, Henry IV, and Henry V, presided over a period of consolidation, yet also sowed the seeds of profound conflict with the papacy. Meanwhile, the eastern frontier expanded into Poland and Hungary. Crusader states took root in the Levant, and imperial authority wrestled with feudal decentralization. Conrad II, secured election by promising to respect the rights of the princes and church. His coronation in Rome in 1027 reaffirmed the imperial, papal partnership. He intervened in Italian affairs, restoring order in Rome and Lombardy, and creating the Archbishopric of Benevento to balance papal power. His son, Henry III, wielded extraordinary authority, deposing 3 rival popes in rapid succession and installing his own candidates. His imperial-backed pontiffs, Clement II, Damasus II, and Leo IX, took initial steps toward reform, targeting simony and clerical marriage. Henry III's reign epitomized the high watermark of Salian power, an emperor, whose will shaped both secular and ecclesiastical hierarchy. But after Henry III's death, tensions exploded. His son, Henry IV, inherited the throne as a minor, with Archbishop Anno II of Cologne as regent. In 1073, Pope Gregory VII published the Dictatus Papae, asserting papal authority to depose emperors. When Gregory excommunicated Henry IV in 1076 over investiture, the right of lay rulers to appoint bishops, Henry's authority unraveled. Defying the Pope's ban, Henry marched to Canossa in 1077 and performed penance before Gregory, a symbolic humiliation, but also an opportunity to secure absolution. This episode, known as the Walk to Canossa, illuminated the investiture controversy's core, whether emperor or pope held ultimate authority in Christendom. The struggle dragged on for decades, pitting disciplinary reforms championed by the Gregorian papacy against imperial insistence on episcopal investiture. Henry IV's son, Henry V, initially allied with reformers, forced his father's abdication in 1105 and negotiated the Concordat of Worms in 1122. This compromise granted the Pope sole authority to invest bishops with spiritual symbols such as ring and staff, while the emperor retained the right to invest the temporalities, such as land and secular regalia. The Worms Agreement marked a turning point. Imperial influence over church appointments waned, and the papacy emerged as an independent power. Meanwhile, the empire looked outward. Emperor Conrad III of the new Hohenstaufen line and his nephew Frederick I Barbarossa participated in the Second Crusade, though with mixed results. Frederick I, famed for his red beard, organized the imperial coronation at Rome in 1155, but conflict with Pope Alexander III and League of Italian Cities limited his effectiveness in Italy. His efforts to assert imperial rights over Lombardy gave rise to the Lombard League, backed by Alexander III and supported by Venice and other communes. At Legnano in 1176, Frederick's cavalry suffered a stunning defeat, forcing him to recognize northern Italian autonomy in the Peace of Constance in 1183. Despite setbacks in Italy, the Hohenstaufens consolidated their German base. Under Frederick II, grandson of Frederick I and scion of the Swabian Hohenstaufen and Norman Sicilian lines, the empire reached a cultural zenith. Raised in Sicily, Frederick II spoke multiple languages, patronized science and literature, and promulgated the Constitutions of Melfi in 1231, a comprehensive legal code for his southern kingdom. In Germany, he convened the first publicly published General Council of Princes, the Reichstag, systematizing feudal obligations and coinage standards. But Frederick II's ambition fueled a new papal conflict. His repeated absences in Sicily, relaxed enforcement of crusading vows, and assertion of imperial rights in Italy led Pope Gregory IX and Innocent IV to excommunicate him multiple times. In 1245, the First Council of Lyons deposed Frederick, though the emperor refused to step down. His death in 1250 left the Hohenstaufen line without a mature heir, igniting the Great Interregnum between 1254 and 1273, when no universally recognized king reigned in Germany. By 1250, the Salian, Hohenstaufen era had passed its zenith. The emperors had exercised quasi-absolute power over church, nobility, and town, but at the expense of provoking fierce resistance from an emboldened papacy and rising communal autonomy. The investiture struggle had elevated the Pope, the Lombard League and free cities had limited imperial power in Italy, and the interregnum revealed that royal election by princes now outweighed dynastic succession. Yet the legacy of this era endured. Administrative reforms, legal codifications, and a cultural flowering under Frederick II left indelible marks on medieval Europe and shaped the contours of the empire that would persist, albeit in diminished form, until its dissolution in 1806. By the mid-14th century, after the turmoil of the Great Interregnum and the ascension of the Luxembourg king, Charles IV, the Holy Roman Empire sought a stable constitutional framework to govern the election of its monarch and define the balance of power between emperor, princes, and imperial cities. In 1356, Charles promulgated the Golden Bull, a foundational constitutional document that would shape imperial governance for the next century and a half. The Golden Bull codified the composition and privileges of the 7 prince-electors known as Kurfürsten, who alone held the right to choose the king of the Romans, the title assumed by the heir apparent. These electors comprised 3 ecclesiastical princes, the archbishops of Mainz, Trier, and Cologne, and 4 secular rulers. The King of Bohemia, the Count Palatine of the Rhine, the Duke of Saxony, and the Margrave of Brandenburg. By enshrining their hereditary right to vote, the Golden Bull arrested the fractious contests that had plagued imperial elections, while granting electors significant prerogatives such as exemption from appeals to external courts, control over coinage and customs within their territories, and judicial autonomy in capital crimes. The Golden Bull also regulated the electoral process. It mandated that elections be held in the city of Frankfurt, with coronations of kings at Aachen, thereby anchoring imperial ritual in fixed locales. Electors were required to attend in person, or in their absence to send proxies, reinforcing the personal nature of fealty. Once elected, the king had to present himself for coronation by the Pope at Rome, a requirement he later bypassed, underscoring the empire's dual spiritual, secular character. Beyond elections, the Golden Bull affirmed other core institutions. It confirmed the permanence of the imperial diet or Reichstag, which convened 3 estates, ecclesiastical princes, secular princes, and imperial cities to deliberate legislation, taxation, and defense. Diet sessions rotated among major cities, Nuremberg, Regensburg, and Augsburg, ensuring wide territorial representation. Though its decrees required prior imperial assent and the consent of the estates, the Diet became a forum for negotiating imperial taxes known as Reichspfennig, regulating tolls on rivers and roads, and coordinating responses to external threats such as Ottoman incursions. The era also saw the rise of territorial principalities. Electors and other princes consolidated power by codifying local law, founding universities, and building administrative bureaucracies staffed by nobles and trained jurists. Many princes established standing troops, projecting authority both within and beyond imperial borders. The notion of Landesherrschaft, or territorial lordship, flourished. Rulers codified serf obligations, regulated guilds, and minted proprietary coinage, further diminishing reliance on imperial structures. Imperial cities, in theory free and subject only to the emperor, leveraged their economic clout to negotiate privileges. The Hanseatic League, a network of northern German trading cities, dominated Baltic and North Sea trade, imposing its own tariffs and naval patrols. Imperial diets ceded many mercantile and judicial rights to these cities, cementing their quasi-autonomous status and creating a third corporate estate alongside princes and ecclesiastical lords. Yet the Golden Bull did not resolve underlying tensions. The emperor's authority remained circumscribed. Without a permanent court or bureaucracy, imperial edicts often required princely cooperation to enforce. Financial dependence on the Hussite War, subsidies, and on Bohemian crown lands further limited imperial leverage. Attempts by emperors such as Sigismund or Frederick III to centralize justice through projects like the Eternal Peace, which outlawed private feuds, depended on Diet approval and the goodwill of territorial lords. By 1500, the empire's constitutional architecture, characterized by elections through electors, a diet of estates, and a network of semi-sovereign territories, had matured into a complex but functioning polity. The Golden Bull's clarity secured dynastic continuity. The House of Habsburg acquired the electoral title of Austria, King of the Romans, in 1438 and thereafter dominated imperial elections. Yet the decentralization entrenched by the Golden Bull and the rise of territorial statecraft meant that the emperor would henceforth rule with, rather than over, the princes, laying the groundwork both for Renaissance collaboration and for the confessional conflicts to come. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther's 95 Theses, nailed to the door of Wittenberg's castle church, ignited a tectonic shift within the Holy Roman Empire. What began as an academic disputation over indulgences rapidly escalated into mass religious revolt that fractured Christendom and transformed the empire's political landscape. Luther's theology, characterized by justification through faith alone, the priesthood of all believers, and the primacy of Scripture, resonated among princes and commoners disillusioned with clerical abuses, papal prerogatives, and imperial fiscal exactions. By 1521, when Emperor Charles V summoned Luther to the Diet of Worms, the reformers' refusal to recant set him outside imperial and papal protection, triggering the Edict of Worms outlawing Luther's writings and followers. Yet enforcement proved impossible. The Elector of Saxony, Frederick the Wise, sheltered Luther at Wartburg, and scores of territorial rulers found Luther's message both spiritually appealing and politically expedient. The spread of Protestantism created a new confessional divide. Lutheranism took root in Electorate of Saxony, Electoral Palatinate, Hesse, and large swaths of northern Germany. Zurich's Zwinglianism and John Calvin's Reformed theology influenced Swiss, Alsatian, and southwestern German territories. In 1530, the Diet of Augsburg convened to reconcile differences. Philip Melanchthon's Augsburg Confession presented Lutheran doctrine, while Charles V demanded imperial unity to defend against Ottoman incursions. Without resolving theological rifts, Charles accepted the presentation but refused legal toleration. Faced with imperial repression, Lutheran territories formed the Schmalkaldic League in 1531. Headed by Philip of Hesse and John Frederick of Saxony, the League pledged mutual defense and congregated its own military forces. Their position rapidly strengthened. In 1530, Charles's absence from Germany to address conflicts in Italy and the Ottoman threat gave Protestants breathing room to institutionalize reforms, dissolve monastic holdings, and establish territorial churches. Imperial attempts at conciliation, such as the Diet of Speyer between 1526 and 1529, led to temporary toleration, only to be rescinded under Charles's renewed vigor. The 1529 Protestation by Lutheran princes at Speyer coined the term Protestants. When the emperor, returning from campaigns in North Africa, sought to reassert the Edict of Worms, League members refused compliance. The turning point arrived in 1546, when Charles V launched the Schmalkaldic War. Initially, imperial armies achieved successes. The Battle of Mulberg in 1547 saw Protestants routed and the capture of John Frederick of Saxony. The emperor imposed the Augsburg Interim in 1548, a provisional settlement restoring Mass, clerical celibacy, and other Catholic rights, though conceding communion in both kinds. But heavy-handed enforcement, coupled with League resilience and Habsburg Spanish overextension, proved unsustainable. By 1552, Protestant resurgence led by Maurice of Saxony forced Charles to retreat once more. The Peace of Passau in 1552 effectively repealed the interim, and Maurice's political maneuverings ensured Protestant League survival. Finally, the Peace of Augsburg in 1555 codified the principle of cuius regio, ius religio. Princes would determine the confession, Catholic or Lutheran, of their territories, and subjects who could not conform were free to emigrate. Calvinism remained excluded, setting the stage for later conflict. The Reformation rift thus transformed the Holy Roman Empire. Ecclesiastical principalities, bishoprics, abbeys, and free ecclesial cities evaporated or became secularized in Protestant regions. The imperial church system collapsed as princes assumed control over church lands, courts, and tithes. The emperor's role shifted. Instead of a universal Christian sovereign, he became one medieval prince among many, struggling to mediate between confessional camps. Imperial diets henceforth functioned as forums for negotiating religious peace and interstate alliances rather than executing centralized reform. By 1555, the empire was permanently confessionalized. The constitutional affirmation of territorial religion entrenched political fragmentation, but also secured a fragile stability, albeit one to be tested during the catastrophic 30 Years' War between 1618 and 1648. The Reformation rift had irrevocably redrawn the empire's spiritual and political map, melding theology with statecraft in ways that would echo through early modern Europe. As Europe entered the 17th century, the Holy Roman Empire found itself at the crossroads of religious, dynastic, and political conflict. Long simmering tensions between Catholic and Protestant estates, amplified by competing Habsburg and Bourbon ambitions, erupted into open conflict in May 1618. A group of Bohemian nobles, angered by the Catholic emperor's attempts to curtail their religious freedoms, defiantly threw two imperial governors from the windows of Prague Castle. a dramatic act that sparked the Bohemian Revolt and set off the conflagration known as the 30 Years' War. What began as a regional struggle in Bohemia quickly escalated into a continent-wide catastrophe. Protestant and Catholic princes alike solicited foreign allies, and Swedish, Danish, and French armies marched across German lands. The city of Magdeburg was sacked in 1631. The Palatinate lay waste by 1620. Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, arriving in 1630, temporarily reversed the Catholic tide with disciplined brigades and innovative tactics, only to fall at Lutzen in 1632. His death ushered in French intervention under Cardinal Richelieu's direction, marking the transformation of the war into a broader contest between Habsburg Spain and France rather than a purely confessional struggle. By mid-century, the human toll was unimaginable. In the most ravaged regions of present-day Germany, between 1.25% of the population perished from famine, disease, and violence. Rural settlements were abandoned, trade routes collapsed, and urban centers struggled to feed survivors. Imperial authority, already fragmented among more than 300 semi-autonomous principalities, bishoprics, and free cities, all but evaporated as military entrepreneurs carved out territories for themselves. Amid these horrors, diplomatic efforts gradually gained momentum. Peace negotiations opened in 1644 in the Westphalian towns of Munster and Osnabrück, each hosting separate but related conferences for the empire's Catholic and Protestant camps. After 4 arduous years, 50 imperial princes, as well as representatives of France, Sweden, Spain, and the papacy, affixed their seals to the twin treaties of 1648. The Peace of Westphalia enshrined the principle of cuius regio, ius religio. Each prince could determine the religion of his own territory, extending it to Calvinists alongside Lutherans and Catholics. It reasserted the sovereignty of imperial estates by limiting the emperor's power to raise armies and levy taxes without consent, and granted France and Sweden substantial territorial gains in the empire. Most significantly, Westphalia codified the concept of state sovereignty. External powers agreed not to interfere in the empire's internal affairs, while the Holy Roman Emperor, though retaining the imperial title, saw his practical authority further circumscribed. The imperial diet remained, but its decisions required near unanimity, effectively immobilizing collective action. The empire entered its final centuries as a loose confederation of sovereign princes, ecclesiastical territories, and imperial cities, bound by dynastic ties to the emperor, but free to pursue their own foreign alliances. While the Peace of Westphalia ended the bloodiest conflict in European history to that point, it also formalized the dismemberment of centralized imperial power. The Habsburgs shifted their focus to Austria, Hungary, and Bohemia as core domains, leaving the German lands to rebuild in their own fashions. The devastation of war drove agricultural reforms and spurred population movements, shaping economic and social patterns for decades. In this aftermath, the Holy Roman Empire survived only as a theater for princely sovereignty, its medieval cohesion irretrievably fractured, yet its legal and constitutional forms lingering until Napoleon's final dissolution in 1806. By the mid-18th century, the Holy Roman Empire's patchwork of quasi-sovereign territories had endured 2 centuries of relative stability under the shadow of Habsburg hegemony and the lingering structures of the Peace of Westphalia. Into this world of entrenched provincial privilege and fragmented authority stepped Maria Theresa, who inherited the Habsburg lands in 1740 upon the death of her father, Emperor Charles VI. Though precluded by Salic law from succeeding to the imperial throne, Maria Theresa secured the Pragmatic Sanction, guaranteeing her right to rule Austria, Bohemia, and Hungary. Her accession sparked the War of the Austrian Succession, during which she defended her inheritance against rival claims by Prussia, Bavaria, France, and Spain. Out of these crucibles of conflict, Maria Theresa emerged not only with her dominions intact, but also with a newfound sense of centralized purpose. Determined to fortify her lands against internal inefficiency and external threat, Maria Theresa embarked on comprehensive reforms. She restructured the tax system to distribute fiscal burdens more equitably across the nobility and clergy, who had long been exempt. Administrative ministries in Vienna were consolidated under able ministers such as Kaunitz in foreign affairs and Wenzel von Haugwitz in finance. This reduced the influence of local estates and streamlined revenue collection. Recognizing that a well-trained army underpinned dynastic security, Maria Theresa professionalized the military, standardizing training, uniforms, and supply systems, thus laying the groundwork for her son, Joseph II's future reforms. Maria Theresa also championed education and public welfare. She mandated primary schooling for boys and girls, established state-controlled seminaries to train priests in Enlightenment principles, and founded hospitals and orphanages to mitigate poverty. While retaining her Catholic faith, she tolerated limited Protestant and Jewish worship, pragmatically recognizing the economic contributions of religious minorities. When Joseph II assumed co-regency alongside his mother in 1765 and sole rule in 1780, he embraced more radical Enlightenment ideals. He embodied the archetype of the enlightened despot, believing that a benevolent autocracy could best affect social progress. He decreed religious toleration in the Patent of Toleration of 1781, extending limited rights to Lutherans, Calvinists, and Jews. In 1781, Joseph abolished serfdom, freeing peasants from hereditary labor obligations and permitting them to marry, trade, and travel without seigneurial approval. He centralized judicial authority by promulgating a single penal code, outlawing torture, and establishing state-run courts to resolve disputes uniformly. Yet Joseph's zeal outran the empire's political culture. His secularization of over 2,000 monasteries provoked clergy and rural communities who relied on monastic charity. His emphasis on German as the administrative language in multi-ethnic Bohemia and Hungary incited nationalist resentments. When he attempted to subordinate the Hungarian Diet and strip noble privileges, Hungarian nobles rose in revolt, forcing temporary retreats. The sheer pace and scale of his reforms alienated the traditional elites whose cooperation remained essential in an empire still lacking coercive central institutions. By the time of Joseph's death in 1790, many of his edicts had been repealed or modified under the more cautious rule of Leopold II. Yet, the imprints of the Maria Theresa to Joseph II's reign endured. The ideal of state-driven modernization took root, inspiring later 19th-century constitutional movements. Their reigns marked the empire's final experiment in enlightened absolutism, a valiant but ultimately incomplete effort to weld a fractured confederation into a more cohesive state. As Napoleon's armies loomed on the horizon, the Holy Roman Empire stood reformed yet fragile, poised between ancient structures of princely sovereignty and the emerging currents of nationalism and popular representation that would soon sweep away its medieval legacies. By the closing years of the 18th century, the Holy Roman Empire stood at a crossroads. The seismic tremors of the French Revolution had overturned established monarchical and feudal orders across Europe, replacing them with citizen armies and republican governments. In 1790, under Francis II, the Habsburg ruler sought to stem the tide by initiating modest reforms. He confirmed the sovereignty of the empire's myriad princes, reorganized the central bureaucracy in Vienna, and guaranteed the ancient privileges of the imperial estates. Yet these gestures proved insufficient to counter the revolutionary fervor sweeping north of the Alps. When France declared war on Austria in 1792, the conflict quickly engulfed the empire. French armies, led by generals Dumouriez and later Napoleon Bonaparte, crossed the Rhine, inspired both by ideological zeal and by strategic necessity. The French proclaimed themselves liberators, emancipating German subjects from clerical tithes and feudal dues. The fractious German princes, many of whom had welcomed French reforms, found themselves opportunistically allying with or capitulating to Paris in hopes of preserving their own territories. A cascade of treaties such as Basel in 1795 and Campo Formio in 1797 saw Austria cede the left bank of the Rhine to France, while the empire's internal cohesion unraveled. Napoleon's ascendance to first consul and by 1804, Emperor of the French, brought further upheaval. He engineered the creation of the Confederation of the Rhine in 1806, a league of German states directly allied with and protected by France. 16 princes accepted his protectorate, formally withdrawing from the imperial diet at Regensburg. This act struck at the heart of imperial legitimacy. Those princes who remained, principally the Habsburgs and their loyalists, found themselves increasingly isolated. Amid these pressures, Francis II faced an impossible dilemma. His traditional claim to be Emperor of the Romans now applied to an entity rapidly losing its constituent parts. In August 1806, he famously declared the abdication of the imperial crown and the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire. with that more than a millennium of a supranational Christian polity, born in the coronation of Charlemagne, came to an end. Francis II retreated to his hereditary title as Emperor of Austria, preserving Habsburg dynastic dignity even as the broader imperial framework collapsed. The empire's demise carried profound consequences. The political map of Central Europe was redrawn. The Confederation of the Rhine under French auspices presaged the later German Confederation, while Austria and Prussia emerged as competing great powers. Napoleon's legal and administrative reforms lingered long after his defeat in 1815, having introduced secular codes, streamlined bureaucracies, and modernized military conscription in the German territories. Meanwhile, the cultural memory of the empire, such as its cathedral chapters, imperial coronations at Aachen, and the rituals of Diet and Reichskammergericht, faded into nostalgia and, in some romantic circles, became symbols of a lost unity. Yet, the Holy Roman Empire's legacy survived in more than myth. Its legal traditions informed later German civil codes, its imperial circles foreshadowed federal structures, and its confessional accommodations anticipated the pluralism of modern Europe. The dissolution of 1806 did not simply extinguish an institution, but transformed the context in which German-speaking lands would forge new political identities, from the 1848 revolutions to the eventual unification under the Prussian crown in 1871. Thus ended the Holy Roman Empire, not with a single catastrophic defeat, but through gradual erosion, diplomatic realignment, and revolutionary upheaval. Its final chapter underscores how centuries-old institutions can persist even as they adapt, and how seismic external forces can deliver the coup de grace. The empire's dissolution stands as a fitting coda to a millennium of imperial experiment, reminding us that the forms through which power is exercised may vanish, even as their influences endure in laws, language, and the very idea of political community. Thank you for joining Ancient Odyssey on this epic voyage through the Holy Roman Empire. From its Carolingian dawn under Charlemagne and its Ottonian revival, through medieval Zenith and Reformation rifts, to the Enlightenment reforms of Maria Theresa and Joseph II, and finally to Napoleon's final blow. We've traced how an imperial idea evolved over a millennium, shaping European law, diplomacy, and culture long after its formal end. If you've enjoyed this journey through the triumphs and tribulations of the Holy Roman Empire, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more deep dives into history's hidden legacies. Until our next odyssey through time's labyrinth, stay curious, stay bold, and keep exploring the empires that shaped our world.